So when that happens, you're having a reaction. Your body is like trying to go up this, like what feels like an unimaginable hill and when you've never hiked before. And so your response is one of the 4 different types.
She got really, really triggered before a really big exam she had to take, and it impacted her performance, and it stressed her out and sent her into such a bad shame spiral that she started questioning taking her life. Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia. Happy Monday, happy day whenever you're listening to us. And honestly, we're really grateful that you're on this journey. It is, by the time we're recording this, it is literally March 1st. So this one, we're hot and heavy, steamrolling into spring. I don't know about you guys, but Bianca and I are super excited. We just talked about how snow was coming, and we are really hopeful that that never happens again. Anywho, regarding today, the conversation that you'll be joining us in, the topic that we're going to be getting into is, what is your go-to shame response? And my intention for this episode, to really ground us in an intention, is to help us really understand, maybe not at the deepest level, although I'm acknowledging there's a part of me that wants us to go to the depths of shame, really starting to understand shame from a very surface level. And so by the time that you're done with this episode, my goal is to make sure that we all have an understanding what our go-to shame response is, because we might not even identify that we have shame. Very similarly, what I found in my travels and conversations with other people, a lot of us don't even identify with having trauma. And trust me, you're not alone in that. That was me too. At one point, I never identified as someone who had experienced trauma, and I certainly didn't experience or identify the experience of someone identifying as having shame, right? So if you're in that phase, trust me, this episode is going to be mind-blowing for you and deeply impactful to your inner world, the world that helps us understand ourselves at the deeper level. And if you're someone that's been a part of this evolved journey with us, the more that we can understand shame and how that impacts our relationships and our life that we live, more importantly, the life that we don't live but want to, right? We can understand how shame plays out. And most importantly, from what I've learned and heard when it comes to clients, how we can be more empowered because we're not running away from shame, pretending like we don't have any, pretending like it doesn't impact us. Because if you're a human being, then you have some degree of shame. And it shows up maybe in your unconscious, but your behaviors usually showcase where your shame lies. So for example, I had a client that I was on the phone with a couple weeks back now. And this client, we were talking about, it was actually right after you and I did Out of the Mud. We did an Out of the Mud live event all about shame. And that one was actually really, really powerful because our community really dove in and got vulnerable with us. But I bring that up because the client that I was talking with, she and I were having a dialogue post-event. So I was kind of giving her some of the cliff notes, for lack of better words. And why we brought this up was because ultimately she's working on a journey of dropping, her goal is to drop 20 pounds before her wedding, right? So this is coming from someone who has binge snack her entire life. This is someone who has really struggled to be consistent at anything. And so one of the things that I really wanted to have a conversation around with her, just like I would with anyone else, is asking her, hey, do you know what your shame response system is? And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm not expecting you to know at all what that is, but I say that and I ask that question because all of us have shame. None of us know what our shame response system is. And the shame response system, this is kind of what we got into in Out of the Mud, is we have different cues that trigger shame, right? Different things that happen in the world. Let's say, for example, you're at the beach, all of a sudden you're looking around and you're like ready to like take off your cover up. And then you're like, oh, you have all these feelings, right? You're flooded with emotions. Maybe even before the beach, you get preemptive anxiety because Man, those lava cakes at Domino's have been really on fire, right? I'm calling myself out here.
I was about to say, do you still eat those?
I adore them. Yeah, every now and then. With that said, right, we have a shame response that happens. And the cue might be someone else that we're comparing to. And for my client, when she was looking and imagining her future version of herself at the wedding, she's comparing herself on her social media feeds with all these brides that are super freaking skinny, not even close to her body type, et cetera, et cetera. So her cue,
You mean all the
literally
photoshopped photos?
all the exactly all the Photoshop, Pinteresty, like not real, probably AI generated photos. So she's comparing herself to that, which honestly, nothing against her. This happens so often, whether it be in weight loss, whether that be in fitness training, whether that be in financial travel, you name it, right? We've all been there where we're comparing ourselves to someone else,
Mm-hmm.
or we're engaging in the world where our cue systems get set off and then we respond. Although it's more reaction than anything. So I was asking her, what happens when you would go and just even imagine what you're going to look like on that day? And she's like, I'm filled with so much like excitement and I'm so excited to get after it. And then I say, okay, well, let's look at, who are you comparing to? And then you immediately see her body just sink because obviously you're comparing yourself to someone, and that was just obvious. And she was like really vulnerable. She said, I'm comparing myself to this entire Instagram account that is specifically focused on brides, and it is a highlight reel of all these giant weddings that are wildly out of my reach. And so the brides that do exist, it is a body type that's not even close to mine. It's people that I don't even know. And so she like really vulnerably shared that. And I said, okay, so when that happens, you're having a reaction. Your body is like trying to go up this, like what feels like an unimaginable hill and when you've never hiked before. And so your response is one of the 4 different types. And I listed them for her, which we're going to do together. And after that, she was like, oh my God, I never realized that my shame response was this. And now that I know this, I feel so much more empowered to actually navigate my worlds because I recognize how shame has been prohibiting me and impacting me to where literally that dream of dropping 20 pounds would be impossible because of how I operate. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. That's what we want to do, right? So for each and every single one of us, the question is, what is your go-to shame response? B, before we kind of list out the 4 types, thoughts around this. And I also want to open up the floor to like what you've experienced and make sure that we can pull in our own experiences around this in this episode.
Shame is such a dirty emotion. You and I have talked about this a lot, and with a lot of the narrative going around now, which I understand why it is, and um I was a part of this too, that there's no such thing as good shame. All shame is bad. You're never supposed to feel it. A lot of people, I think, are very afraid of shame. And I think a lot of people are very afraid of shame because none of us had people in our lives that helped us navigate those really distressing feelings that come up when you're in shame. More often than not, we were in shame inducing experiences that just made us feel so much worse about ourselves and so much worse about like the people that we were and the experiences that we were having. And I think there's not enough dialogue about shame, which again, I totally get. It sucks when you're in it. It is such a heavy feeling. It is such a devastating emotion and experience to navigate through if you don't have people, places, things, and adaptive stress responses that help you to navigate your shame. I was on a call with a client this morning, medical student, top of her class at UMass, like doing amazing. And she got really, really triggered before a really big exam she had to take. And it impacted her performance. And it stressed her out and sent her into such a bad shame spiral that she started questioning taking her life. And she didn't have the resources or the support before our call to really process this and to navigate through it. How many of us are being so severely impacted by our shame that we're considering doing wild things like that? It's more people than we think. I think a lot of us don't want to have that really dark dialogue. And let's be real, a lot of people are going to avoid this episode because it is a heavy topic. But the thing is, the more you avoid a conversation like this, the more likely you are to engage in unhelpful stress responses and unhelpful shame responses when you're experiencing it. And so an episode like this is really going to help you to understand what it is, why you feel it, why you go through it the way that you do, and then how do you not go through that, which is exactly what I did with the client today. Like, I really helped her to understand what are the thoughts and the feelings and the memories and the beliefs that are coming up for you that are sending you into this hysterical shame spiral about a catastrophizing thought about something that might happen. Which there's like a 0% chance of her deepest fear even happening, but she believes it is because she's so enmeshed in her shame. Emotions, I say this all the time. Emotions are not the problem. The problem is not in the emotions. Like, there's nothing not inherently wrong with shame. It's your reactions to them. Shame, just like any other emotion, is a message. When you understand what the message is, when you understand what this thing is trying to tell you, you can respond to it in a better, healthier way that gets you to the place that you want to be. So, we've done episodes on what is shame, so I don't think we need to go through that like in depth, but can you give a short description of what shame is, and then let's dive into the 4 types or the short shame responses?
Shame responses. So at the deepest level, like, shame in a nutshell is a deeply ingrained belief about yourself that something is permanently wrong with you, where you feel at the fundamental aspect, core being of yourself, you feel unworthy, flawed, or unlovable, right? At the deepest extent. One of the biggest things that we talked about that actually really landed in Out of the Mud virtual event, when we talked about the techniques or tools to, the best techniques to releasing shame, what our community said really like helped us. Oh, okay, that's shame. What it emotionally feels like is feeling small, exposed, and unworthy or unworthy. What that actually physically does and how that shame is experienced in the body, what I've heard clients describe is really this: a tight chest, right? Really, it localizes as tightness within the chest or in the shoulders. A heavy heart is how they've also described it, and or a lump in the throat. So whenever there's been that time where your body's felt that, or those emotions have been, kind of moving throughout your body to where you're feeling that smallness, shame's present. And it's like, whoop, shame's here, right? And to beat what you had said, shame is not a bad thing. Shame is actually a really, really helpful emotion, because at the deepest core levels, it helps us understand where our belief systems to feel bad about ourselves as a person have been ingrained within us to keep us small and silent and quiet. And shame begets shame, meaning that shame plants more seeds of shame. So that shame spiral becomes this giant doom loop, which we've all experienced. So the 4 different types of shame responses, when that comes up, when shame is present, it's 4. There's 4 very basic ones. And I want every single listener thinking about themselves, right? When you feel that in your body, and after you listen to this episode, your RES, your reticular activating system, is going to be primed to be like, ooh, okay, now I understand what that emotion or what that feels like. Ooh, that might be shame. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to pay attention to what happens after that feeling, because this is where your shame response kicks in. You either blame yourself, you blame others,
Mm.
you get defensive, or you withdraw. And I'll give a perfect example when it comes to an intimate relationship or family, because probably family, right? Let's do family because everyone has a family. Not everyone might have an intimate relationship. When you get around your family and there's something that is said, I love, I love your hair. There might be some type of tightness in your chest because the way in which they said it wasn't fully genuine, and or you might have an insecurity around your hair, and or you might feel like you're in the spotlight. And shame is present. You don't know what to say. Maybe you didn't really ask for that compliment from that creepy uncle, right? There might be some degree of shame. And all of a sudden, what you do after that is your shame response.
Mm.
So I've had clients where they literally have attacked, so they've blamed themselves for having their hair done nice because it's like, ooh, I didn't actually want compliments. So because I feel deeply unworthy and small, like I don't want this compliment. So I'm going to blame myself and I'm going to literally go ahead and attack myself for ever having done my hair nicely. And then I'm actually going to withdraw. So I'm going to literally go into my shell and then kind of find all the edges of the room to not have another dialogue where I'm put in the spotlight. The blaming ourselves is where the inner critic gets really, really prevalent and just attacks anything that you had to do with this. When you blame others, it's pointing the finger externally. So I had this client again, like everything, her shame response was blame others and then blame herself. So she would point the finger out why she's never been able to drop 10 pounds, 5 pounds, whatever, because everyone else got in the way of that. That's blaming others, right? The defensiveness is no ownership. Well, I didn't know to do this. I never learned how to develop these skills, like it wasn't because of me. It was because of this, right? You get defensive and start to justify why things are the way that they are. And then withdrawing is very simple. You go into your shell and you shut down and your body starts to collapse, right? And so when you're in a social setting and something comes up and or you're on your phone, you're comparing to someone, you likely have one of these 5 shame responses. And more often than not, we have more than one. So my ask to the listeners is to identify which go-to their body tends to gravitate towards, because what I've realized in doing research around shame and really, really seeing it in a clinical setting is that we have a shame response that is a learned behavior as a byproduct of how we grew up. So for example, if your mother's shame response was attack others, likely there's some degree of that shame response that's been quote unquote downloaded into you from a behavioral standpoint, because shame shows up in the internal world, but how we respond to that behaviorally in our external world is usually what we saw growing up, right? So very interesting, lots of fun stuff, but like I said, I don't want to dive super deep. Be anything in closing of this episode as listeners really start to reframe shame as, or maybe from a dirty and bad thing to a good and helpful emotion.
I think one of the biggest things that is going to be really helpful for everyone who's listening to this is understanding whether the shame you're feeling is helpful or unhelpful shame. There is unhelpful shame and there's helpful shame. There is a difference between the two. Most of us get stuck in the unhelpful shame where we're just going down the rabbit hole of how terrible we are. And that ends up becoming, part of our core beliefs and part of the way that we live our lives. And then it ends up encompassing everything about our lives. And it's like, I'm just this terrible person.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy shame is understanding that I'm not being the person I want to be. I'm not living in alignment with my values. I'm not living in alignment with the person that I keep telling myself I want to be, and I feel shame about it, and then I'm going to go do something about it. When you can understand whether the shame that you're feeling is helpful or unhelpful, how you typically respond. So do you blame yourself? Do you blame others? Do you attack or do you withdraw? You start understanding your pattern. This is the biggest thing that you and I really help our clients do, is understanding what is the pattern that you are repeating. The pattern that I repeated over and over and over and over and over again was I was living in shame. Anytime anything happened, I would blame others and then withdraw, and then blame myself and then attack myself. So it was an initial like, oh my God, I'm a helpless victim. And then it would completely go into, and it's actually all my fault and I'm this terrible person, and I would attack myself. And then that would then further reinforce the unhelpful shame that I felt. And the cycle repeated itself over and over again.
Yeah. Shame begets shame.
Shame begets shame when you're in that experience. Obviously, when you're in the middle of a shameful experience or a shame-bound experience, you're not going to be able to do this. But when you're out of the situation, do a thought record. What was the situation? What was going on? What happened? What was I feeling? Shame, anger, humiliation, guilt, resentment, frustration, whatever. Where did my mind take me? Did a memory pop up of when I was a kid and I had this similar experience happen, and all of this negative stuff happened as a result of that? Did I have a thought of how dare they say that to me? Did I have a thought of blah, 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 whatever? And then analyze, what did I do after that? Oh, that's why I acted that way, because I had this thought and this feeling, and it brought up all this stuff, and then I reacted this way. You start understanding the patterns. The more you can understand your patterns, the more you can start making these really awesome changes in your life, and then inch your way towards using shame, using these feelings, using these situations in your life to help you become the person that you want to be. That is exactly what I did. And it's the only reason I am here today, able to do the things that I'm able to do, because I analyzed my shame. I analyzed the feelings I had. I surrounded myself with good people who could help me, and I worked through all of it. And if I can do it, you sure as hell can too.
So powerful. I love what you just said there. Partnering with shame, just like partnering with any of our emotions, is one of the most empowering things. And if you currently don't feel as though you're capable of doing that, as if you're worthy to do that, if you're deserving of doing that, that's where so many of our clients start too. That's where we started as well. We started very, very small and built, and having someone who can help you do that is the most important thing. Because when you feel shame often tells us that we're alone, and that just is not true, right? And so healthy shame can be constructive, can be paired with, and you can build towards a more healthy or adaptive type emotional experience. So for example, that can often transmute to guilt. That's where self-compassion and how you go about doing that is where one-on-one work goes so far.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, my episode suggestion, if you want more on this podcast topic and in this arena, I actually think 354, the difference between regret and guilt that you need to know, that's a solid starting space. B?
Nice. 360, the real reason we self-sabotage. All right, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are listening to this when it came out, happy March. We're super excited for spring to come. Emilia and I are sunflowers. And we will talk to you all soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.